The Manifest Part 1. The chain-link gate rattled open and Elias Mercer guided his unmarked van into the pre-dawn gloom of the Port of Wilmington's Container Terminal D. The air was a damp cocktail of diesel, salt rot, and wet concrete. His headlights cut through the mist, illuminating endless rows of corrugated steel, a monochrome maze under sodium vapor lights. The digital clock on his dash read 5:47. He slowed at the guard booth, a plexiglass cube glowing with a single monitor's blue light. The guard inside, face shadowed by a hoodie, didn't look up until Elias tapped his laminated Port Authority badge against the glass. The man's eyes flicked to it, Auditor, Level 3, Restricted Access, then to a clipboard. He gave a bored nod, pressed a button. The gate finished its jerky opening arc. No log entry call, no vehicle ID check. Elias noted it. Terminal D was supposed to be a high-security, bonded zone. Anomaly 0. He drove forward, tires crunching on gravel. His eyes catalogued the yard. To his left, the skeletal gantries of ship-to-shore cranes stood silent against the lighter grey of the sky. To his right, the container stacks began, forming narrow canyons. And there, at Dock 7, he saw it. 2 Peterbilt 389 haulers, their chrome gleaming dully under the lights, engines idling, exhaust plumbing in the cold air. Their trailers were empty, positioned for loading. Too early. The first day shift longshoremen weren't due for another 23 minutes. Anomaly 1. He parked beside a corrugated steel office shed, its windows dark. He killed the engine. The silence was immediately filled by the distant rhythmic beep-beep-beep of a forklift backing up and the low, constant hum of refrigerated containers, reefers, keeping their cargo at a precise chill. The door of the shed opened, spilling yellow light. A young man in a fluorescent orange high-vis vest stepped out, yawning. A junior shipping clerk, according to the shift roster Elias had memorized. The kid's name tag read J. Parker. "You Mercer?" Parker asked, his breath clouding. "Yes." Elias exited the van, retrieving a hard-shell clipboard and a ruggedized tablet from the passenger seat. He wore a navy water-resistant jacket, cargo trousers, and steel-toed boots. He looked the part. "Early bird," Parker said, accepting the audit authorization paperwork. He pulled a handheld terminal from his belt, scanned the barcode on Elias's ID badge. The device emitted a single, affirmative beep. Parker glanced at the screen, shrugged. "You're clear. Stacks in row 14. Manifests synced to your tablet. GPS should take you right to it." Elias took back his ID. The system had accepted Level 3 credentials with no supervisor ping, no secondary verification. For a bonded terminal handling high-value, sensitive cargo, that protocol lapse was a glaring fault. Anomaly 2. "Quiet this morning," Elias stated, a casual probe. Parker shoved his hands in his pockets, glanced toward the idling trucks at Dock 7. "Big push. Got a tight window on a career-bound shipment. Got to clear the stack before the day shift clutter hits." He nodded toward the container forest. "It's all yours. Supervisor's around here somewhere if you need a sign-off." Elias gave a tight nod and turned toward the stacks. The container yard was a monument to globalized indifference. 40-foot boxes, some faded by sun and salt, others shiny and new, were stacked 4 high. His boots splashed through oily puddles reflecting the sickly orange lights. The air grew colder between the stacks, the wind channeled into a biting flow. He began his scan, walking the perimeter of row 14. His eyes tracked details, his mind cross-referencing them against 1,000 prior inspections. Reefer units, a dozen humming, their external condenser units vibrating, drawing power from the yard's grid. Status lights glowed green, normal. Dry container, non-reefer, a standard blue 40-foot box, container number GSTU-478102. It, too, had a thick orange power cable snaking from a junction box to a retrofit port on its side. Why would a dry unit need sustained power? For lights, ventilation. Anomaly 3. Human element. A trio of longshoremen in heavy jackets operated a massive orange forklift. They were shifting a container from row 13. As they maneuvered, the driver deliberately gave row 14 a wide berth, angling his load away from the specific stack containing GSTU 478102. Not fear, habit, trained avoidance, anomaly 4. He stopped, pulled up the digital manifest on his tablet. The entry for GSTU 478102 glowed on the screen, listed cargo, medical polymers, temperature sensitive, category, reefer, refrigerated, weight 4,800 kilograms, destination, Busan, South Korea, clearance, priority, time sensitive. His finger hovered over the details. First, the category was wrong. The container's prefix, GSTU, was logged in the global registry as a standard dry freight unit. A major misclassification that any basic system check should have flagged. Second, the weight, 4,800 kilograms. An empty 40-foot container weighed about 3,800 kilograms. That left 1,000 kilograms of cargo. Medical polymers of the volume this container could hold would have a density yielding a weight closer to 15 to 20 metric tons. 1,000 kilograms was the weight of people, a dozen people, maybe 15, with minimal water. Anomaly 5. Mercer. Elias turned. A man in a pristine high-vis vest, clean-shaven and sharp-eyed, approached. His tag read, Riley, Supervisor. "That's me," Elias said, his voice neutral. Riley offered a tight, professional smile that didn't touch his eyes. "We're on a hard clock. That entire stack," he gestured to row 14, "is scheduled for the Morning Star, which has a tidal departure window in—" He checked a rugged watch. 27 minutes, lanes booked, miss the window, the penalties are astronomical. Your audit needs to respect that timeline. Pressure, applied politely, but with the steel of contractual obligation underneath. Elias nodded once. "Understood. I'll be expedient." "Appreciate it. The paperwork's already been cleared by upstream compliance," Riley said smoothly, anticipating the request. He held up his own tablet, showing a digital clearance stamp superimposed over the manifest for GSTU 478102. The stamp was from Global Surety Logistics, a third-party verifier. Elias leaned in slightly. The metadata in the corner of the stamp read, timestamp 6:15. His own watch read 5:52. The approval was post-dated by 23 minutes. A forged clearance. Anomaly 6. "I'll still need physical inspection access," Elias said, his tone flat, procedural. "Visual verification of cargo seals, interior condition, standard for a priority shipment." Riley's smile tightened. "Of course. But as you see, it's pre-cleared. The seals are intact and logged. A visual walk-around should satisfy protocol, given the time constraints. Opening it would break the bond, require a full recertification. We'd miss our window." A logical, operational objection. Elias held his gaze for a beat, then turned wordlessly toward container GSTU-478102. Up close, it was unremarkable. Slightly newer paint, fewer scratches. The heavy-duty lock on the doors was standard issue. He knocked on the steel wall with his knuckles. Thud. The sound was dead, muffled. Not the sharp, hollow ring of an empty metal box. This was the dull thud of insulation, spray foam, or lined padding. He placed his ear against the cold, vibrating metal. At first, just the hum of the external power unit. Then, beneath it, a sound, a faint, shifting rustle, a scrape. Then, unmistakably, a muffled cough, quickly stifled. Not mechanical, organic, human, anomaly 7. He straightened. In his peripheral vision, he saw the black dome of a security camera, mounted on a light pole 20 yards away, pivot with a soft whir. Its lens, like a single dark eye, was now centered on him. Near the entrance to row 13, a dock worker who had been coiling a hose stopped, turned, and stared directly at him, not moving. The surveillance was no longer passive. Anomaly 8. Elias walked calmly to the container control kiosk, a ruggedized touchscreen on a pole. He swiped his audit badge. The screen flashed red. Access denied. Container under active load protocol. All inspections suspended. Behind him, he heard the distinct chirp of a tablet receiving an alert. Riley's voice came, closer now, all pretense of warmth gone. "Inspection's done, Mercer. You should clear the yard." Elias took 2 deliberate steps back from the container, creating space. His mind was clear, a tactical map overlaying the physical space. He heard the deep, hydraulic grunt of the nearest Peterbilt's air brakes releasing. The truck's diesel engine roared to life. Simultaneously, the large forklift whined, its driver executing a sharp turn, its forks lowering and aligning perfectly with the steel frame of GSTU 478102. On Elias's tablet, clutched in his hand, a notification pinged. Greater than manifest update. Container GSTU-478102. Status loaded/finalized, awaiting transport. A new bold countdown appeared, overlaying the manifest. Greater than departure window, 2140, remaining. The system sealed itself. The paperwork locked into place. The clock set the rhythm of everything that followed. Elias Mercer's position shifted. He was now inside a live trafficking pipeline, bound to its mechanics, with 21 minutes and 40 seconds before it cleared the port and dissolved into the shipping lanes. Part 2. 21 minutes and 40 seconds. The digital countdown on his tablet was the only clock that mattered. Elias moved away from the glaring supervisor, Riley, putting a stack of empty containers between them. He walked with purpose, as if heading to another audit point. His fingers moved across his tablet screen, navigating to a diagnostic backdoor. Using the metadata from the forged clearance stamp, the post-dated timestamp, and the vendor ID from Global Surety Logistics, he spoofed a secondary, urgent inspection request from a fictional port health official. The system, stressed by the tight departure window, pinged for verification, found the vendor credentials valid, and granted a 10-minute override window. He circled back to the container control kiosk. His badge swipe this time triggered a green light. Greater than manual access menu activated. 0957 remaining, a narrow digital window. He now had the system's tentative permission to touch the container. He walked directly toward container GSTU 478102. The orange forklift was idling beside it, the operator, a big man with a thick neck, watching him approach. The man shifted the machine, its massive tires crunching gravel, blocking Elias's path to the container doors. "It's sealed and loaded," the operator said, his voice a low rumble. "You're in the way." Elias held up his tablet, showing the green override authorization. Port health, possible biocontamination flag, immediate inspection required. The operator's eyes flicked from the screen to Elias's face, doubt clouding his features. He keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Riley, auditor's got a health override, wants to crack the seal." Across the yard, Elias saw Riley stiffen, look down at his own tablet, then back. The supervisor's reply crackled, tinny and tense. "Delay him, I'm coming." The operator nodded, a faint sheen of sweat on his temple. "Gotta wait for the boss, pal." Elias chose not to argue. Instead, his eyes tracked upward. 2 of the black dome cameras had pivoted, their lenses now fixed on this location. A third, 50 yards down the truck lane, swiveled to join them, a triangulated stare. His presence was now officially flagged. Digital escalation had reached its limit. He turned as if to walk away, then pivoted back, stepping inside the operator's personal space. Before the man could react, Elias drove his elbow deep into the man's solar plexus. The air left the operator's lungs in a pained whoosh. As he doubled over, Elias wrapped an arm around his neck from behind, applying precise pressure to the carotid arteries. The man struggled for 5 seconds, his hands clawing at Elias's sleeve, then went limp. Ethan dragged the unconscious bulk behind the adjacent container stack out of the line of sight of the cameras. He took the man's radio and the key from the forklift's ignition. He moved quickly back to the idling machine. He climbed into the cab, the familiar controls cool under his hands. He engaged the forks, slid them under the steel frame of container GSTU 478102. The hydraulics whined as he lifted the 40-ton box just 6 inches off its pad, enough to relieve the pressure on the locking bar. He released it. The container slammed down with a ground-shaking crash. The sound of fracturing metal was sharp and final. The electronic seal on the doors sparked and died. The heavy latch disengaged with a clunk. Elias jumped down, gripped the cold handle of the right-hand door, and pulled. It swung open a foot with a groan of stressed metal. The smell hit him first. Stale air, sweat, human waste, and the sharp, clinical tang of sedatives. Inside, in the gloom, shapes resolved. People, 8 of them. They were on thin mats, wrists and ankles zip-tied to anchored D-rings on the container floor. Their heads lolled. Most were unconscious or semi-conscious under chemical sedation. A small oxygen tank and a ventilator unit sat in the corner, its gauge dipping into the red. A child, a girl of maybe 10, was awake, her eyes wide with terror over a gag. She coughed, a weak, wet sound that echoed in the insulated space. Trafficking payload. Confirmed. His analytical, quick-thinking mind snapped into place, cold and absolute. He couldn't call the police and wait. The port's response would be bureaucratic, slow. By the time they untangled jurisdiction, the oxygen would be gone. These people would be dead, and the pipeline would have sealed behind them. He needed chaos, a system-wide fault. He ran to the power junction box serving row 14. He opened it, a rat's nest of color-coded cables. He identified the main feeder lines for the refrigerated container bank, 4 thick cables. Using the insulated cutters from his belt, he severed all 4 in one clean motion. The effect was immediate. The constant background hum of a dozen reefers ceased. Across 4 stacks, temperature alarms began to shriek, a rising, ear-piercing warble that cut through the dawn. On the docks, lights on the condenser units flashed from steady green to frantic red. Somewhere in the port operations center, a dozen fault alerts would be flooding the screens simultaneously. A temperature breach in bonded, temperature-sensitive cargo was a catastrophic event. It triggered an automatic quarantine protocol. No truck could legally leave the yard. The shipping lane was frozen. Seal breach confirmed. Security to Stack D, now, Riley's voice shouted from the radio Elias had taken. The tone was pure fury laced with panic. Elias climbed back into the forklift. He navigated to its terminal screen, a simple interface linked to the port's cargo management system. He pulled the full routing logs for GSTU 478102. He downloaded them, along with the cargo chain history. In 30 seconds, he had the digital trail. An upstream warehouse address in Newark, a Shell shipping company registered in Cyprus, a fake medical supplier front. The evidence was now a file on his tablet. A man rounded the corner of the container stack at a run. He held a police-style baton. He saw Elias in the forklift cab, hesitated for a split second. Elias was already moving. He dropped from the cab, meeting the man as he raised the baton. He caught the swinging wrist, twisted it inward and down, using the man's momentum. A sharp crack. The man cried out, the baton falling from nerveless fingers. Elias drove a knee into his stomach and shoved him face first into the container wall. The man slid down, unconscious. Quick, ugly, functional. He heard the shot before he felt it. A round from a pistol struck the gravel 2 feet to his left. Riley, 20 yards away, weapon held in a 2-handed stance. The bullet fragmented on impact. A searing line of fire tore across Elias's left thigh just above the knee. He grunted, stumbling back against the forklift's tire. He looked down. A deep, bleeding furrow through his cargo trousers. Pain radiated up his leg, hot and insistent. He tore a long strip from his shirt tail, wrapped it tightly around his thigh above the wound, and tied it off. The pressure was brutal, but the bleeding slowed to a seep. His mobility was now compromised. The board had to be burned. Completely. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he climbed back into the forklift. He gunned the engine, its diesel roar drowning out the still screaming reefer alarms. He didn't aim for Riley. He aimed for the stack. He drove the forks into the side of the container stacked next to GSTU 478102. Metal shrieked. He lifted, pushed. The massive container teetered, then fell with a deafening, apocalyptic crash onto the main truck lane leading to Dock 7. He reversed, slammed into another, toppling it sideways, creating a jagged steel wall across the thoroughfare. The physical bottleneck was complete. No vehicle was getting in or out of this section of the yard. On his tablet, the manifest for Container 14 auto-updated, the system responding to the cascading alarms. Greater than status, quarantined, temperature breach / physical obstruction. The departure window voided itself, the countdown replaced with a flashing void symbol. In the distance, the first wall of official sirens began. The port's own security, drawn by the alarms and the unmistakable sound of crashing steel. Riley stared, his face a mask of pure, incandescent rage. He raised his pistol again, not aiming at Elias, but at the open container, at the people inside. "You blew it all!" he screamed. Elias moved. He dropped from the forklift, his injured leg buckling slightly, and positioned himself squarely in the open doorway of container GSTU-478102 between Riley's weapon and the sedated figures inside. The trafficking operation was blown. The timetable was ash. The system was in full, noisy collapse. But the final physical extraction had not yet begun. The sirens were coming, but Riley's pistol was here, now, and 2 more unmarked vans had just skidded to a halt at the sealed entrance to the yard. Part 3. The gunshot wound in his thigh was a white-hot brand. The sirens were a distant promise. Riley's pistol was a present threat. The 8 people in the container were a dying weight. Elias didn't hesitate. He turned his back on Riley and the advancing vans and stepped into the gloom of the open container. The air was thick and desperate. He moved quickly, checking each person. 2 were in serious distress, a woman and an older man, their breathing shallow, lips tinged blue. Hypoxia. The small oxygen tank was empty. He saw the oxygen masks and lines from the forklift's internal cab air system. He ripped them free, used his knife to cut the lines, and jury-rigged a connection to the container's own limited air supply port. It wasn't medical grade, but it was oxygen. It would have to do. He placed the masks over the 2 worst-off faces. Their chests rose more deeply. A 15-minute window, maybe. He stepped back out, grabbed the controls of the forklift. He angled its massive forks against the half-open container door, jamming it into place. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it created a solid steel barrier a man would have to climb over. The victims were now partially concealed, their immediate access blocked. Rounds punched through the thin upper wall of the container, 2 feet above the huddled forms. Elias pulled the 2 conscious victims, the child and a young man, lower. A 3rd shot tore through the door, splintering metal and grazing Elias's right shoulder with a searing tug. He grunted, feeling the warm spread of blood down his back. He stayed low, raised his own pistol, and fired a single round into the gravel at Riley's feet. The shot kicked up dirt. Riley flinched, ducking back behind a container. A momentary pause. Elias moved. He exited the container, not through the blocked door, but through a small, hinged rear access hatch used for electrical lines. He slipped into the narrow gap between container stacks, a world of shadows and dripping condensation. He circled. One of the men from the newly arrived vans was moving along the next row over, a handgun held low, peering toward the chaos. Elias waited until the man passed his hiding spot, then stepped out behind him. His arms snaked around the man's neck, cutting off his air and voice. The man thrashed. Elias drove a knee into the back of his leg, buckling it, and swept his standing foot out. They fell together. Elias maintained the choke until the man went limp. He took the man's pistol, then, with a swift, brutal motion, stomped on the side of the man's ankle. A wet crunch. The man would not be pursuing anyone. Elias left him in the mud. Back at the forklift, he accessed the terminal again. The sirens were louder now, mingling with the still wailing temperature alarms. He uploaded the routing logs and the cached surveillance stills from the port cameras, including clear shots of Riley and the loading crew. He set the data to send to 3 destinations: the Port Authority's internal compliance server, the encrypted inbox of the Joint Maritime Crime Task Force, and a public customs whistleblower portal. He set a delayed public release trigger for 90 minutes. The network was now burned. Denial was impossible. He finished just as Riley found him. The supervisor came around the forklift, his face a mask of fury, his pistol rising. "You dead man!" Elias didn't let him finish the sentence. He threw a heavy steel locking bolt he'd grabbed from the ground. It wasn't meant to be a weapon, but it was hard and fast. It struck Riley in the forehead with a sickening thwack. Riley staggered, blinded by pain and blood. Elias closed the distance in 2 strides. He grabbed the wrist of Riley's gun hand, twisted it up and back. The pistol clattered to the ground. Elias drove his shoulder into Riley's chest, slamming him back against the corrugated steel of the container. He heard the distinct snap of a collarbone. Riley screamed. Elias used a length of heavy cargo strap from a nearby pallet, bound Riley's wrists to a container tie-off, and left him there, slumped and moaning, in plain view. Over the port's PA system, a robotic voice began to boom. "Security lockdown initiated. All personnel remain at your stations." The game had changed. The institution was arriving. Elias saw a group of 3 genuine longshoremen huddled by a shack, watching the chaos in terror. He walked toward them, his gait stiff from his leg, blood darkening his shoulder and thigh. He held his badge up, his voice a flat, commanding blade. "Port Authority Emergency Protocol, you 3. Get those pallet jacks, now. Move those people out of that container and lay them flat on the asphalt. Cover them with those thermal blankets from the reefer unit. Do it now." His tone brooked no argument. The visible pistol in his other hand reinforced the point. The men scrambled. They worked quickly, using the hydraulic pallet jacks to gently lift the sedated victims from the container floor and transport them out into the open area near the access lane. They covered them with silvery emergency blankets. It was a crude field hospital, but it was visible and it was away from the line of fire. One of the traffickers, a driver, broke from cover and sprinted for the cab of the nearest Peterbilt. He was trying to run the blockade. Elias raised his pistol, aimed at the truck's grill, and fired twice. The engine coughed, died, and began spewing steam and oil. The driver threw the door open and fled on foot into the maze of containers. Elias let him go. He had one final piece to plant. He limped to the port's nearby control shed, a small, unlocked building with monitors showing camera feeds. Inside, he plugged a flash drive into a terminal, dumped the complete cargo chain records and his own annotated timeline onto it, and left the drive sticking out of the keyboard, a glaring red thumb drive in a grey room. He then shed his bloodied audit jacket, leaving it on the floor. From a hook by the door, he took a grimy, high-vis dock worker vest and pulled it on. He smeared his face and arms with grease from a canister, mussed his hair. He kept his legs stiff, his breathing controlled despite the pain. He walked out of the shed and merged into the stream of other dock workers, now being herded by arriving port security officers. He kept his head down, became part of the human current flowing toward the main gates for headcount. He passed through the chaos, flashing lights, shouted orders, the groans of the injured traffickers, the cluster of silver blankets where EMTs were now starting to work. He was a ghost in a high-vis vest. 3 blocks from the gate, he turned into a service alley. He dropped the 2 pistols down a storm drain. He tightened the makeshift bandage on his thigh, the pain now a deep, throbbing ache that threatened to buckle his knee. He breathed through it. He reached his van. He started the engine, the routine motion a small anchor. He drove 5 miles, parked behind a derelict warehouse, and changed his license plates. He stuffed his bloody clothes into a chemical waste bin. In the harsh fluorescence of a 24-hour gas station bathroom, he cleaned the graze on his shoulder and the deeper furrow on his thigh, applying sterile pads and wrapping them tight. His movements were slow, precise, devoid of emotion. On a cheap burner phone bought weeks ago, a news alert flashed. Breaking. Major human trafficking ring busted at Wilmington Port. Multiple in custody, victims recovered. He deleted the alert. He powered the phone off, removed the battery. He drove east, the first hints of sunrise bleeding into the sky behind him. The port, the container, the silver blankets, the snapped collarbone, all receding in the mirror. The system had faltered. He had corrected it. The cost was tallied in blood and pain. The road ahead was empty. He drove into it.